Hi guys, welcome to the video, welcome to Geneva, and welcome to this beastie here. This is the Toliss Airbus A319 for X-Plane 11, and it was this version of it, I will stress, was released a few weeks back. Basically the original was released some time ago. Subsequently they then did the Airbus A321, as part of which they made some enhancements of their bits and bobs from the original A319. And now those enhancements have been brought back across to the 319 to this. This is version 1.6. Now I haven't had version 1, so I can't do a direct comparison in terms of what version 1 was like compared to version 1.6, but this is what we're going to be looking at in today's review. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a look at it in the time-honoured fashion of have a look at the outside, the inside, take it for a flight and see what we think. Now as part of that we are going to have a relatively detailed look at the flight management guidance system and the MCDU. I will stress at this point it's one of the best I've seen, certainly in X-Plane in my opinion, but we will have a play with some of the more advanced elements of it as well. We're not just going to chuck a plain route in and take it from there. Now obviously some of these elements that we'll have a look at, a high proportion of people just won't even bother using. You know, if you're taking off at A, flying a standard route, landing at B, the chances are we're not going to see a lot of this, the necessity for a lot of the functions within the MCDU. However, the aircraft's also got quite a well developed model for, you can see we've got some of the animations here going. I'll just quickly scroll down here before this door closes. You can see the level of 3D modelling of the lugs for the hatches here, very, very good. And we've got the interior modelled there very nicely. You will notice, of course, there's no exterior ground equipment. I believe that's to come. But I like these automatic doors with the closing mechanisms. But anyway, as I say, the flight management guidance system we'll have a good look at, but also we're going to have a look at the fault modelling system, because it's got a very unique and well developed fault modelling system, and we'll be having fun with that, and hopefully it won't destroy our flight. If it does, I'll probably have to re-record the end bit, but what we'll do is we'll see how we get on with it. Now looking at the 3D model at a distance, this sort of distance, it looks quite good, it looks very respectable. What I will add is that there is only the one livery with the package, this Toliss one, the factory livery. However, the community of repainters have been hard at work, and there's an awful lot of liveries available for this aircraft. But obviously the quality is beholden to the skill of the repainter, so it's something that's becoming more common these days, with developers basically saying, hey, there's people out there who are potentially more skilled than we are in terms of doing the artwork, let's let them do the artwork. So let's have a look at the 3D model. The 3D model looks very good at a distance, and I will stress at a distance because there's areas that pick up points. Now the wingtips can have different forms, so you can have different flavours. You can have the standard Airbus wingtip here, or you can have the sharklets. Likewise the engines, there's different engines. You can have the CFM 56s, which is what we've got here. You can also have the IAE engines, all of which come as standard. And likewise there's lots of additional 3D modelling that is of very good quality. However, what we're going to do is we're going to drill down to the first of the few areas where I don't really like the appearance, and it's this nose radome. I just don't like it. I think I'm not sure whether it's a texturing issue or whether the panels haven't joined up correctly, but it just looks, to me, it doesn't look particularly great. Likewise, if you scroll in, you can also see that the textures around this area aren't particularly great. So that's supposed to be a static port, and we can't read any of the writing or text on there at all. Now contrast that with a really lovely 3D modelling of the interior of the cockpit as you look from outside, and actually, you know, weird enough, you can start to read text here, yet when you come down here on the text, you can't read the text on the static port. So we've got nice ancillary parts in terms of probes, aerials, etc. As part of the modelling, very nicely done. Windscreen wipers and so on and so forth. Satellite navigation or SATCOM aerials, and the usual comms aerials, etc. around. Now one of the things I will say is that if you look at the panel line here, it's not particularly great. There's areas where I would have anticipated a curve, so a better curve around here, and we've got a bit of straight lining. Would have anticipated a better curve around here. We've got a bit of straight lining. This should be flat. It's got kind of a flat area here for an Airbus, but this line, you can see, it's not quite happening really, is it? So likewise, if I go to the 3D modelling down by the wing root, which is an area I always look at because of the complexity of the shapes, you've often got compound curves of curves going in different directions. You can see it just doesn't look great. I don't really know how to explain what's going on, but all of this just doesn't really seem to get there for me. There is good use of PBR materials, so where it's supposed to be shiny like on the Oleo, you can see it's a very good metallic texture. We've got some more satin effect of the wheels. The paintwork is nice and glossy and so on and so forth, so it is good use of PBR materials for the paintwork. Although there's a couple of things on the exterior. As we go into the engines, you can see the straight lining, and obviously this is a balance. Nice effect that it's just turning slowly in the wind, look. But looking at the intakes, you can see although it's got the lovely PBR chrome effect, it does have a bit of straight lining, and there's a balance here for the developers in terms of the more polygons they put in, the better they can smooth off curves, but the worse the impact on performance will be. But yeah, so certain areas I'm really impressed with, so let's just zoom out again so we don't go crazy all over the place. But before we do that, the other thing I'm going to just highlight is some of the areas out here by the wings. This panel here, this grey panel, this should be the navigation lights for the aircraft, but you can see it's just a panel. It's got no attempt to try and make out that it's a navigation light, and if you go quite close in, it's not like it's glazed and there's something behind it. Static wicks are all present and correct, which is a nice feature, and you can see some of the ports etc. for doors are open at the moment. But we're going to just mention the undercarriage, because the undercarriage has been done to a very high standard in my opinion. Let's just drop down, just squeezes itself a little bit forward so that we can have a look at everything that we might want to have a look at. There are a few occasions where the modelling goes slightly awry, so this aerial, for example, you've got a gap here where it should be flush with the aircraft surface, but the thing is, look at it from a distance and you'd never really know. We're only being hypercritical here. But then, you know, this is an $80 product, so let's just have a quick look around here and I will show you what I mean. The undercarriage has been done to a very high level, so we've got the nice chromium effect here with the PBR. As I say, we've got the sort of satiny effect of the tyres and the wheels. We've got a mottled effect in terms of the actual calipers, and all of the hydraulic lines and the brake lines are all present and correct, really nicely modelled. Lovely bit of 3D modelling, and likewise with the undercarriage, with the over centre links etc. Very nice indeed. Nose wheel pretty much the same. Nice effect with the scissor link here, very nicely put together with the various brake lines etc. Not quite sure what's happening with this section here. It might just be the angle we're viewing it from. It's not quite there, but it's nice to see 3D forms for the hubs. That kind of thing I like. I hate it when you just see 2D hubs. A couple of elements with the textures is that on the inner sides of the engines you can see that the text is backwards. It's all right on the outside as you look from the outside in towards the central line of the aircraft, but if you look from the centre line towards the wingtip on both engines, let me just get around here, don't know if we can see it very well from here, but you can see it's wrong way around. Very nice chrome effects around here, rear of the engines, love that effect, very good indeed. And yeah, it's so the exterior for me is a bit of a mix. Let's just zoom back out a bit. That's not zooming out. Let's go back out a bit and we'll just come up by where the tail is. The exterior for me is a bit of a mix. The texturing's not great. As you zoom in, it loses a lot of clarity. You can see it becomes quite pixelated, and certain areas like the doors, it's not particularly great. The 3D modelling is okay. It's not spectacular, but then obviously the benefit is that it doesn't crush frame rates like some add-ons do. So it's worth considering, you know, the multitude of things that are part of this. But as I say, I seem to get decent frame rates, but I've also got a very powerful PC, so it's not really something that you can read into from the figures I get up here. But yeah, so overall it's very good. It's got a few areas where it's a bit scruffy, but other than that it's not too bad at all. So let's pop into the cockpit, and what we're going to do is have a quick look at the cockpit. Let's turn these up, get some light into the panels. This is how it will load in once it's done its self-test on the screens if you're on electrical ground power, which we are here. And I will highlight this cockpit is really lovely at night. The lighting is just lovely. Coming over here, 6 of these screens. Whilst realism is great, scroll wheel lights are also time consuming. But that's not specific to this aircraft, that happens with a lot of aircraft. And then we've got the MCDUs, just turn those up. So here we are on ground power. And this gives us a good opportunity to talk about a couple of things. The first thing we're going to talk about is this bad boy here. This is the Toliss Interactive Simulation Control System, the TISKIS, whatever. First thing I will note is, in fact, we'll bring the product page over because this will be really helpful for a few things. So let me just select that and we'll bring that over here. So it's always worth bearing in mind the product page because they're going to tell you a few things about features that you may not spot directly. And some of these, unless you're aware of them, they're not necessarily obvious as to what's going on. So a couple of things. Officially licensed by Airbus. That obviously gives this product a certain amount of credibility. It's not saying that it's a full training sim as such, but it is saying that basically Airbus have had a look at the licensing for this product and they're happy for it to be associated with their name. So, a few highlights. The FMGS and SIDSTAR, etc. You know, there's a lot of Airbus products out there, and a lot of them in the descriptions will have very similar things, if not the same for certain things, so, you know, sound packs, etc. But this has got a nice out-of-the-pack Turbine Sound Studios custom sounds for the CFMs only, which is a bit of a shame. It would have been nice to have some for the IAEs out of the pack, although the sound packs are available for both individually anyway. I suspect that's from version 1. I'm not sure that version 1 would necessarily have had the TSS out of the pack. Realistic fly-by-wire, blah blah blah. Now this is a really significant one. We will go through this in a little bit of detail, but the fault injection interface, it's very wordy here, but it will be very apparent when we have a look at it. Choice of engines, wingtips, sharklets, etc. Now a lot of this is very standard fare, so support for SIDSTARs, etc. One of the ones I've not seen lauded about much though is ARC. I've not seen much of that previous product saying actually as will fly an ARC approach. So we're going to do an ARC approach, a DME ARC to see how it gets on, but obviously we've also got course heading to intercept, radius to fix, holdings, etc. So it's quite an in-depth flight management guidance system in this. But this is an interesting one, the ability to change star whilst already in the star. Not something I've come across very often, but a very nice feature. So yeah, I like the idea of that. Most of the rest is as we would expect. I do like the element of tongue-in-cheek, so top-notch aircraft systems, none of your bog-standard rubbish, eye and ear candy, and usability features. There's a couple of bits in usability features that are particularly nice. There's some bits that are, shall we say, you don't generally notice, but control surface hinge modelling allows for surfaces to float. This would be if you've got no power to a flight control surface, but you have got airflow going over it. It will float to its neutral point. And you can see it's after the loss of all actuators on a surface. Now things like this normally wouldn't be significant, but they do become significant when you've got a fault injection model such as this. Talking of which, fault injection interface, really good, we'll have a look at that. There's a few other bits for those who are interested. Brake temperature modelling. A lot of things like the hydraulics and the RAT are obvious in terms of if you're going to have a failure injection model, you have to have things to try and manage your flight with. Likewise, custom air conditioning, flight warning system with ECAM actions supporting numerous system failures, etc. Most aircraft now have got detailed 3D cockpit, 3D exterior, choices of wingtips. There's nothing remarkable in this bit really, other than the custom TSS sounds. But these 4 usability are really, really good. This is, along with the fault injection model, this is really, really good. Situation loading and saving, really good if you want to practice doing a routine. So basically you can save a position just before the approach and practice the approach many times. Likewise, you could save the position just before takeoff with faults set up so that you'd have an engine failure just before V1, so that you could keep practicing your responses to that. And then auto saving, crucial for me because my PC crashes quite a bit. Jumping waypoint to waypoint, we'll have a look. I've never really had much of a go at this, but we'll have a look at that in the flight. And then the integrated takeoff performance data. Now that's more significant than you think. In terms of doing a flex departure, a flex temp departure. Basically what you do is you tell the aircraft a fake outside air temperature and it will adjust the amount of thrust it applies accordingly. But you need to know quite a lot from the performance tables of the aircraft in order to implement this correctly, and there's quite a few Airbus models out there where you've got the ability to input a flex temperature, but it's really hard to find any information about what flex temperatures you should put in. Now there's a couple of calculators out there. The one that springs to mind is TopCat, I think it is, which is a takeoff performance calculator for the Airbus, but this has it integral, so you don't have to mess around too much, and it's very nice. I do like the way it works. So as I say, I've started taking an interest in the pages more and more in terms of reviews, so that we can pull them apart really and say, you know, you're saying that this is working or available in the sim. Does it actually work? Is it any good? And are there any bits missing that maybe should have been included but haven't been included? So in terms of our route today, we're going to go to the dispatch system very quickly. New flight. We're going to go, what is it? LSGG to LEMH. We're going to go in the Airbus A319, obviously, not the 318, the 319. There it is. And at this point we're going to put it into kilos. That'll do us for a route. Generate operational flight plan, yes. Boo! There we go. And I like to see it in that viewpoint as well, so that basically everything I need is pretty much on the first 3 pages. Let's get rid of that, and we can have a look at the aircraft. So on the inside of the aircraft, let's get rid of this. We'll just have a chat about the inside. It's typical Airbus. It's, you know, grey. It's very modern. It's not particularly exciting. I wouldn't say it's got much in the way of character, but it is what it is. It's an Airbus cockpit. It's quite nicely modelled. There's some areas where you can just see the straight lining, but they don't really detract from the aircraft. The actual panels are very nicely detailed, and things like the switches. I hate it when you see a switch and it doesn't really look like it's attached to the aircraft. It's kind of a really poor animation, but these are good. The sounds are, shall we say, from a limited palette, so the easiest one I can do to highlight it is down here. So transponder and engine switch, basically the same sounds, different sound, and then I'm sure if I go up here I'll find the same sound. Yep. Windscreen wipers work, obviously. Now in terms of the cockpit, you can see a nice bit of wear and tear on the rotary knobs here. I will add that you can see that although the lights illuminate on the switches, they don't actually move. They're not actually animated themselves, which is a bit of a shame, but it doesn't really lose the sort of immersion. Nice wear and tear on certain switches. Very, very well done. And as I say, the lighting, particularly for this panel at night, is very, very nice indeed. External power's plugged in, and things like this are nice details to different battery voltages. Mankind, when it comes to creating machines, unfortunately cannot create perfection, with one exception, which is the Mark 6 Sea King. That, to my mind, is the only perfect mechanical creation that mankind has ever created in its existence. However, back to the case in point, as you can see, there's nice depth and 3D relief to the panels, and although the texturing isn't particularly popping out the screen, it is good for what it's doing. So you've got shading in terms of the panels, etc. It is very good. Now we're just going to mention a couple of bits about the cockpit. Airbus has been around for decades, and the Airbus A320 and offshoots, so the 319, 321, 318, etc. have been around for decades, and consequently, as a result of that, there's lots of iterations of screens and MCDUs and flight management guidance system, and without knowing exactly what aircraft's modelled, it's very difficult to then critique something exactly. There are clues as to the generation that this has been modelled, so instead of these sort of TV cathode ray tubes, we've got LCD displays. You can tell it's the later variant because it hasn't got a big black border around it, and this vertical speed indicator is enlarged compared to the first version. It's more readable. I don't know of any variances on the top, off the top of my head, regard to the ND, but there's probably going to be some. In terms of the screens over here, there was EIS, the original engine indication system, and then there was EIS 2. And you know it's 2 by virtue of this set of white lines. In the original one it made a cross, so the 4 white lines made a cross. Engine instruments were in the top left, and then these two, the fuel on board and the flaps, were in the top right, and then the bottom were pretty much as they are now. This is the latter version, the EIS2. You can tell because it's basically just got the 3 panels, so the little one here, and that big one there for the engine, flaps and fuel on board. So there are variances amongst the panels in terms of engine indication systems, but as I say, knowing the particulars to a very high level of detail is not my forte, as I haven't done a type rating. And in any case, I think quite often to see the differences you would have had to flown both early and latter aircraft, as quite a lot of people will have done, obviously. So in terms of the MCDU, if I come down here, apparently the distinguishing feature to whether it's an early or latter version is the gap between the buttons here. If it's got a gap, it's a later version, which is the Thales. If it hasn't got a gap, it's an earlier version, which is the Honeywell. But likewise, these things have different software loads and software updates depending on how old the aircraft is. So even if you can identify that it's a Thales, it's not necessarily correct that you've got the right reference data for it. So that's one of the things with something like an Airbus, is that it's very important to make sure that you have the right reference data in terms of the particular variant that you're looking at or modelling. But it is very interesting, you know, looking into these things. It's quite an interesting aircraft in terms of the changes and some of the electronics. But it's not always apparent on first viewing these things. But let's just pop back up to this view. Now, back to the Toliss Interactive Simulation Control System. What a tongue twister. The TIS-KISS, whatever. It's got a number of tabs here, so general settings, joystick actions, etc. The general settings and the joystick actions are fairly straightforward, fairly self-explanatory, with the exception of this. I'm not quite sure why it's on joystick actions, but we'll come back to that. Situations, so you can have it saved with situations, but also there's a very important bit down here for me. If, like me, you have a temperamental computer that wants to do the worst thing at the worst possible time and just crash, autosave, on, off, interval 5 minutes. You can increase it, decrease it to your heart's content. You can also save situations, load situations, and go to the autosave situations. So these are all really good features, very good. Coming over here, wing type, etc., auto. I tend to leave them in auto so that if I'm using a particular livery, it applies it to the correct aircraft. Imperial units you can use as auto, so we're going to go no for Imperial units. Satcom antenna auto. And again, these things are the kind of things that are affected by repaints, or if you want particular authenticity for a particular aircraft flown by a particular airliner. But this is an interesting one. This is performance adjustment. So you can basically make the aircraft new or old. And obviously if it's new, it's just like buying a brand new car out of the showroom. Everything works squeaky clean. The tolerances are really precise. The handling, everything's really good. If you go to old, you end up with the tired old second-hand beast at the back of the showroom that nobody gives any love and attention to. Still works, still drives fine. It's just that, you know, that trim's a little bit squeaky and the performance isn't quite what it had when it came off the manufacturer's production line. So I like this feature, although I have to say I've not really noticed the impact maybe as much as I would have wanted. But I leave it on old because yeah, I'm also old. Loading information. Really good screen this is very intuitive and very practical when you get used to it. Very straightforward. Now the crosses indicate, the blue cross, the dark cross here indicates the fully laden aircraft as it stands on the tarmac ready to go. The red cross indicates the exact same aircraft with zero fuel. So this is your zero fuel weight, this is your weight on blocks, so this is your full aircraft as we sit here now. If we reduce passengers, you can see that we reduce both crosses down, so it leaves blue where it's currently at, and the black and the red are the predicted positions. So we put it all the way up there. Likewise, you can change the distribution of the passengers. Well, it's not going to change when it's on full, is it? Let's put it down to about half. You can change the distribution of the passengers forwards and backwards, and you can see that you can actually put the aircraft out of limits. So if we move it all the way back, you can see it's got an aft CFG. If you move it all the way forward, you can see it's got a forward CFG, but they're out of limits. The blue limit is obviously what relates to the blue square at blue cross, and the red one, the zero fuel, is the red limit. But it's really intuitive, very straightforward. So we'll pop that back to about there. We'll pop ourselves back to, let's have 142 passengers. The joy of it is that it's real time. So although the mouse bit here is a little bit fiddly, it's real time. So You can also muck around with the cargo, and as you can see, depending on where you put the cargo will depend on both the weight and C of G, which is why it moves diagonally in both cases. Likewise, it will warn you if your zero fuel weight is too high, which in that case it is, but we're just going to play the games with it. We'll have zero cargo, apply these settings, and then likewise block fuel, you can change the fuel. Now obviously the zero fuel weight doesn't change, but the other one does. You can see we can have it over the maximum weight, or we can have it under the maximum weight. Does it come up with a warning if we put it there? Yeah, no. That's a shame. We'll put it back to today's weight, which is 7 metric tons. Quick refuel, defuel. You see the aircraft move as it does so there. So really nice. This box down here we will come back to. This is significant for takeoff. Ground services, it's the usual fare, although as we've said before, it's not actually pictorially displayed outside, although it does look like at some point there may well be animated services as well, which will be nice. Pushback, I've not really figured out the best way of doing this, but we're not going to use better pushback, we're just going to use this. And this is operator error if I'm struggling with it. These doors, we're going to you can have them either open or auto or close. We're actually just going to choose close on all of them, because I noticed we had an amber caption on the cargo doors. But it will respond to things such as the stage of the aircraft as you go through preparing it. Fault scenarios. Now this is quite an important one, and this is something I missed on the A321, and it's significant on this. So we've seen it before for years in things like Flight Simulator X, FSX and P3D, that you can choose and use certain fault scenarios, but this has got a really well set up custom fault selection. So what we can do is we can add a new fault, and if we want to do a new fault, you can do it to whatever. So use the mouse wheel to scroll down. We're going to choose an engine fault. And one of the common things with so let's take a step back. What is a study sim? Well, the difficulty is there's no real definition. Nobody sat down and formulated a definition that is widely accepted as this is a study sim. You can have a study in art where you paint a bowl of fruit, for example. That's a study, but the word isn't really. It can be ambiguous in what I'm trying to say in terms of how you apply it to a simulated aircraft. And obviously that's the case with many add-ons where it's, this is study level. Well, is it really? For me, study level is, could I use this as a valid training tool to either learn or maintain skills that I would require to fly that aircraft in the real world? And this is just such an aircraft. For me, this is a study level aircraft, and the fault injection system is a significant part of that, because I can choose to have an engine flame out. Let's say our V1, so our takeoff decision speed is 140 knots. We can choose to have it at an indicated airspeed of, say, 136 or 135, something like that, that we get a sudden flame out 7 knots before we're due to rotate. And at that point you would then have to go through the actions for an engine failure / engine flame out prior to V1. Likewise, you can then just jink it up to 143. So you get to 143, you've now committed to the takeoff, and all of a sudden you have an engine flame out and you're taking it into the air. So for me, the fact that you can specify these things is very good. Likewise, you can have multiple faults, so you can also have an air conditioning fault with one of the packs that comes in at an altitude of, say, 13,000 feet or 21,000 feet. So you've managed to relight this engine. You now continue your climb to a safe altitude for the area. I don't know, let's say it's only 14,500 feet, there or thereabouts, and all of a sudden you start to get pack warnings. Really, really useful. And you can add a couple of faults. It's really quite flexible, but we're not going to do that. We're going to fly with this. Now this is the random faults. Enable random faults. We're going to put that on, because we're going to see if we get any random faults. And I've noticed that if you fly for about an hour, you'll get 2 or 3 faults. If you fly more than an hour, you'll tend to get correspondingly more. If the slider is at this end, this is basically a ratio slider. So imagine that an aircraft has a mean time between failures of 10,000 flight hours. At this end, we've got a ratio of 1, so we will see that fault approximately once every 10,000 hours. At this end, we've got a factor of 1,000, so we will see that same fault materialise once every 10 hours because we've got a factor of 1,000. So in effect what you've got is a very good slider that you can change, you know, how intrusive these faults are. And obviously at this end they're quite infrequent, which is potentially, if you fly on a virtual airline for example, you might want to have it at this end but still have them enabled so that you may have to deal with things as you fly en route. But obviously you don't want it at this end if you're flying a 6 or 7 hour, a 3 or 4 hour route, because you're going to have not much of a plane left to land at that rate. But we're going to leave it at that rate, see what pings up, and see if we can cope with it. You know, the QRH will have things for all sorts of scenarios that aren't on the ECAM, and I have noticed that I've had faults that have come up through this where it's not on the ECAM, and I've sat there going, oh no, this is something for the QRH, the Quick Reference Handbook. Now every aircraft has a Quick Reference Handbook. It's basically emergency checklists that are available to the crew. If you have access to the QRH, this becomes an even better training tool. Likewise, as I say, it contributes towards the overall study sim element of it. Sound add-ons, you know, we haven't got any sound add-ons at the moment, although it does come with its included TSS sound pack, but it hasn't got anything for the IAE, and likewise we've got the usual volume things there. Joystick actions, yeah, pretty self-explanatory. You can set detents for the climb and max continuous thrust detents, but this one we might well try jump to next waypoint. You can have auto pause, so if you want it top of climb or on a warning and caution, for example. Sorry, top of descent, which is really useful because if you think about it, if we're now injecting the failures, it gives us the chance to do them slow time. So as soon as it gets the warning and caution, the sim will then pause and you can go, right, okay, what's happening? Let's sit down and read through the book. And what I might do is I might pop that one on. Just to see how it works. I've not tried it with that. Jump to next waypoint is quite useful if it's really long like this flight and you don't want to be thrilled by straight and level flight in the cruise. Obviously I don't think online ATC are very excited about the idea of you using jump to next waypoint. It might upset a few people, and general settings are exactly what they say on the tin. So things like setting up your initial scenario for external power on, which is what we've got. Back to that page, because that's the page we need. Just make sure we've loaded those into the aircraft, which I think we did do, and we can close that. So we've had a chat about the outside, we've had a chat about the inside, we've had a chat about the X6, the system. Those are set for alignment, so what we're going to do now is set up the flight management system. Now, as I say, because I don't know exactly which software cycle this is based on, it's impossible to turn around and go, I think you'll find that's a different colour, because you just can't do it. As I say, the developers will have a particular aircraft that they've modelled and a particular set of systems that they've modelled, and there's so many with the Airbus with the software revisions. You know, if you think about it, your home computer from 20 years ago is vastly different to what we've got now, and it's no different with avionics in aircraft. You know, the GPS avionics we have now in general aviation were just a thing of dreams when I first started flying light aircraft. When I was actually in the military, it was the first time I flew light aircraft, but yeah, completely different. And as is the case with this. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through just popping in a very basic flight plan, because we can show a couple of features of the MCDU as we go. So initialization, it's got the two initialization pages which you would expect for an Airbus, but we are going from LSGG, not LG, you buffoon, LSGG to LEMH. Where's H gone? My eyes aren't working today. And we're going to align the IRS off that. If it's got the boxes, we can fill it in. So A, B, C, 1, 2, 3 is our flight today. Cost index will pop in of 65. And I did fly this route previously at 370. It took forever and a day to get up there, so we're going to fly it at 350. And we're just going to be rebellious and do our own thing. Having got that information in, we can now jump across to flight plan. And we'll just squeeze this over a little bit so that we can get the tiskis back. I don't know, just acronyms. There we go. So standard fare for putting in an Airbus flight plan. So you've got the opportunity to do your departure today. We are going off, come on computer, tell me, 04. So going off runway 04 on the Balzi 9 November, and that's all good. If it's on the left hand side, it says you've got a temporary flight plan. Do you want to go back to your original flight plan? You've got a temporary flight plan, do you want to insert it? And then this yellow information, when we insert it, becomes green. Lovely. Scroll that up a bit. From Balzi, we're going to go on an airway. And you can choose from Balzi, you can have the next waypoint, you can type in a new destination if you want. What I will say is, likewise, there's normally a box up here for offset, which would give you an offset. Now an offset is where you fly parallel to a leg, but you offset a certain number of miles to the left or to the right of it, and it will continue until such time that you stop it. So unfortunately this doesn't have offset modelled at the moment, which is a shame, but it does have pretty much everything else that you would anticipate in. But what we're going to do in this case is we're going to go to airways, and this is a very nice feature which speeds it along. Normally you'd put airway 2, airway 2, airway 2, but there's going to be occasions when the airways cross, and that intersection is the only point at which those airways cross. Sometimes it's not necessarily the case, but it might be the only point where those two airways cross, or where those two airways have a confluence, at which point you can do the following. So Uniform November 852, pop that up there, that's the airway we're going on, and it intersects with Uniform Zulu 237. Uniform Zulu 237, and it should pick out Pivus, and it's basically saying, well, the only way you can get from that airway to that airway is via that point, so we'll pop it in for you, and it makes data entry very, very quick. So Uniform November 727, Uniform November 727 7, come on, click it, pop that in there, and that comes off at Sargo, SARGO, and again you've got the chance to either undo once. If you click it again, it will erase the whole thing, or you can temporarily insert the temporary flight plan, and that's all good. And no discontinuities, we'll go straight to our destination, and we're going to put in our arrival. Our arrival is going to be for the ILS 19 Zulu, is it? Yeah, the ILS 19 Zulu. We're going to use the SARG 4 SID and star, I should say, and we're not having a VIA. Temporary insert, and we'll just check through and make sure there's no discontinuities. And there don't appear to be any discontinuities, which is all good. So having got our route in, perfectly happy with our route, what we're going to do now is just go across to performance, and this is where this page all of a sudden becomes significant, because you'll notice, having put our runway in, we've got a couple of boxes here now, and obviously what we can do is select our flap profile for the takeoff. Use toga thrust if you want, we're not going to use it, but you'll notice now departure runway is Lima Sierra Golf Golf 04, and these are your V speeds for it. Marvellous. It's also worked out your C of G, your trimmable horizontal stabiliser, your flex temp, and obviously we've got packs on for this. Now the other element here that I really like is it's got the departure runway slope. As I say, you can change the slope, and it does change the V speeds look. So 138 if we've got a downward slope, and 140 if we've got an upward slope. So yeah, it's really quite good in that respect. We'll just set it back to 0 and leave that up there so that you can use this. So 139, 39, 42, so 139 Bosch, 139 Bosch, 142 Bosch. And the flaps we said were flaps 1, and the THS, the trimmable horizontal stabilizer here, is up 0.2. And I've noticed it does vary, so it's not just a bog standard number that it's chucked in. Pop that there, and the flex temp we're going to use is 63. pop that there, and that's us good to go with that. So the only thing we need to do is go back to this page here, the init.b, and another thing I like is the fact that although we've got zero fuel weight here of 53,023 kilograms, so that you can actually get it in a format for here, rather than you trying to have to work out what it is, it's got it here, 55.0 tons, so 55.0, and it should accept that, and our block fuel is 7 tons, should accept that, and then we go, it's all worked out. So back to the flight plan page, let's get rid of the Tiskis, and back up to here. We'll put our nav logo lights on, and we'll put our beacon on for the minute. We'll practice our game of flight simulator, light simulator. But as I say, yeah, it's all pretty good, to be honest. It's not the most exciting overhead panel, but I think you can thank Airbus for that. What it is, however, is very good in terms of the ergonomics. I find it very good, so we'll just click the last few things that we want on down here whilst the APU starts up. Click that. We'll put the transponder onto TARA. For some reason it always loads in with the speed brake up, don't know why, and then we should be pretty much good to go. I've pretty much done everything I wanted to do, although we'll just don't really need the floodlights and the daylight today, but we will play around with it a little bit there. One of the other things, I wish it did have removable armrests, or armrests that moved out of the way. That would make it much easier for the radar. We might not even bother with the radar today because the weather isn't particularly problematic for us. So having started our APU, let's just pop our APU bleeds on so that we've got air to start the engines. In fact, we actually need to start the APU. There is a delay in the switch, which is as per the real thing, and we can just have a watch of this. Actually, I'll just mention the departure. In terms of the departure, it's got no constraints in terms of maximum height climb out. It does have constraints. Can we pop the constraints on? Where are the constraints? There they are. It does have constraints in terms of altitudes. You can see here you've got not below altitude, so you need to be at or above flight level 120 here, etc. It's 5,000 feet down here, but we're going to climb all the way to cruise altitude, which was 35,000 feet. Standard fare for the Airbus. If it's something you want the aircraft to have control of, you push it. If you want control, you pull it. And the 2 dots and 1 dot aren't particularly clear, but obviously the response will kind of tell you that you've got it right. So just make sure we push all of these away from us to give the aircraft control of various bits and bobs. And we should have dot, dot, altitude, dot, which we have. So by now the APU should be up and running. Why is the APU page gone? So APU is up and running. Let's zoom out a bit, and now what we can do is put the APU bleed on, and we can disconnect the external power. And using the, I'm not going to say it again, using this we can get rid of our external power. On the ground surfaces, get rid of that, and as long as the cockpit doesn't go dark, you know you're in a good place. In fact, we need this back. So we're going to do a pushback. We're going to go about 70 meters. We want the tail to the left by, we'll go about 50 degrees. 50 degrees, see how that works. So if I go here, get rid of that for a moment. What we want is tail left about, we'll do it about 70 degrees, shall we? And we'll see how this gets on. And start pushback. It does bring up a tug. Where are you, tuggy tug? There it is. It's not the most detailed tug in the world, but it's very quick. It's much more efficient than better pushback. Does it much quicker. So we'll just pop in and take the brake off. Doesn't talk to you, unfortunately. but it is much quicker and better pushback, as you'll see. It gets on with that job. Right, which way is it going to chuck the tail? Is it going to move the tail? Where is it taking us? Oh, there it goes. We've just put in too great a distance, but hopefully we don't smash into anything. Fortunately, in X-Plane it doesn't have the problem of collision with things the same as FSX P3D does. It can be infuriating if you mismanage a pushback, just like I've done there, which is a great example of it. We need to pop back in and put the parking brake on, and that gets rid of him. And what we will do is start the engines as well. So engine 2, sound changes, which is good. Grey highlighted numbers here for N2's rising. What we'll do actually whilst we think about it is we'll just pop over to engine for this so that we can monitor our oil pressures now indicating N1, and then we're going to expect the fuel to be dumped in and for the EGT to rise accordingly. There goes the fuel with the fuel flow 120, EGT rising, and we'll just monitor that for a second. Make sure it's not going to set fire to us, because obviously we've got a fault modelling system. It could easily do that. That's not beyond the realms of possibility with this aircraft, which is good. I like the idea of that. It's good. It's good. So yeah, so that's engine 1 is fine. It's come up with available. That will turn off in a second. In the meantime, what we're going to do is we're going to start engine 2. Get the barking dog from the transfer unit, and then this will come up, and we're going to have to watch this, as I say. Oil pressure, there we go, starting to get a bit sweaty there. So we've got N2 oil pressure, N1 started 0.1, look, waiting for light up, fuel's in, lighting up. While it's doing that, I'm going to take the risk and go outside for the sounds. The sounds are obviously directional, which is you know, standard par for these days. They're nice. I wouldn't say they're the best sounds I've heard in the sim, but they are okay. They are okay indeed. So yeah, let's jump back in, make sure we haven't set everything on fire. No, the EGT's coming down again. That's always good. So what we can do now is we can turn our APU bleed off and our APU off, and we're going to pop our taxi light on. That's all good. No horrible looking lights up there. Everything else looks good down here, so let's set ourselves up. So we're going to come down here, we're going to set that like that, we're going to drop the first stage of flap, so flap 1. We're then going to come up here, we're going to set that to max, and then at this point we can clear the engine, we can go to status, where's it gone? Status. That all looks good, and then finally take off config, and at this point we're going to start getting our taxi on. Now I will say that the engines, I'm not entirely convinced about the response. We'll have a quick look at the ground handling, but from a low power setting it does start to crawl along. Got nice windscreen wiper effects. I've seen reflections on windows and textures on windows before, but I've just noticed that these are windscreen wiper ones. That's really nice. I do like that. That's a good attention to detail, that is. Okay. It's a very easy taxi here. Lovely looking scenery, isn't it? Lovely looking scenery. Okay, in terms of taxiing, got very good positive authority with the nose wheel. It's got quite a lot of momentum to the aircraft, so if you do quite a tight turn like this, you have to put quite a lot of opposite pedal in to stop the momentum of the aircraft turning. But other than that, it taxis quite well. Sometimes you have to have a relatively high power setting, which is yeah, not entirely convinced about that. Okay, so auto brakes max, signs are on, cabin is checked, spoilers are armed, flaps are in takeoff, config normal. That's all very good. What we'll do is we'll put this on the engine page, and I've got a horrible feeling that we'll come across something. Sounds good with the nose wheel bumping over things. Not overly intrusive, which is nice. Got a bit of nose wheel bounce there, look. Not sure how much of that is the scenery and how much of it is the aircraft and how much of it is the sim. All of these things are, of course, intertwined. We'll bring the power back. Now I've got to remember that we're going for a flex takeoff, so we're not going to push it all the way through to toga. Just bring ourselves to a halt here. Okay, so I always use the mantra which served me well with my commercials with ATPL. So I do need to know what the pressure setting is. This is kind of remiss of me now. There's my Simbrief. What's the pressure setting for here? The pressure setting is 1019. 1019. I don't believe it sinks. It does sync. I've got it set to sync, but you can have it so it doesn't sync, and if you don't sync it, it does come up with a discrepancy error between the two sides, which is very nice. We will reduce that range down for our departure. T is for transponder, TARA is set. At the moment it's TA only. P is for pitot heat, which is automatic in this aircraft. And L is for lights. Let's go with light simulator. And strobe on as we're entering the active runway. Gives us a chance as we start moving to just have a quick look outside and have a look at the lights. You see here this grey panel, it should have a light in it. It does have the light, which is very nice, but we highlighted that it doesn't look at all clear. Can't steer things from the outside view, but you'll see the lights are very nice and effective on this aircraft. They do look good. I'll actually have to go back in to steer. So this is where it's like, oh, we've set it quite high with our probability of failure. Nice noises for the detents as well. So these days, use all the runway if you've got this and you've got the faults set, because you might need it. I've yet to have an engine flame out. Famous last words. That'll ruin the rest of the flight for this. I'd have to re-record it. So let's pop it there. In terms of engine sounds, they're not overly intrusive in the cabin. They're nice. We don't want toga, we want flex 63. Airspeed's alive. We're looking for 139. 100 knots. Trying to keep it on centre line and look at the speed as well. Coming up towards it quite quickly, there we go, and rotate. Gear up. Being an Airbus, we're going into normal law now. So what we're going to do is we're going to choose autopilot 1 for it to fly its departure. Just keeping an eye on the speed. I've just been a buffoon and put the gear back down. I thought we were decreasing in speed. There we go, lever to climb. And we're going to accelerate now to S, which is our flat retraction speed, and then we're going to follow it through the initial part of the departure. And it's flown that very nicely, has to be said. We're going to make our 5,000 feet. By the looks of things, we are quite heavy, but we are going to make our 5,000 feet by our first constraint, which is this one here. Flaps all the way up. That can go. That's all good. And we're away. Happy days. Right. So, what we're going to do now is we're going to have a mess around with, well, I'll also mention something that I really like. All the screens pop out. Every screen pops out. It's not limited. You can have all of the screens or none of the screens or any combination in between. The other good thing about the screens is if I just bring this one up, you can position them wherever you want, which is nice, and likewise you can reduce and increase the speed with the mouse wheel, which really like. So let's just bring this one down here. We're bringing this one down here for a reason. We'll make it as big as we can. We are going to just pop that up to about that range, which will be fine for what we're doing, and we will then go to I think it's going to show it on the plan if we start to mess around with this, but what we're going to do is go to that view there. Just switch it across here. Okay, so what we're going to have a look at is some of the areas in regards to the flight management guidance system. So we'll just go down to a random waypoint. If we go to Rummel, and actually what I'll have to do on the other side is just call up the map so that I've got the map and I can refer to some of the waypoints. So Bevan's going to be a useful one, but what we're going to use is Simbrief before we get there, which is CPY. Any waypoint will bring you to this page. You can see it's a lateral revision from Rummel, but we're not actually going to do a lateral revision. We're going to do a fix and a fix information. So Rummel, what we can do is RUMIL, pop that in there, and what that does now is creates a reference fix, and you can see we've got up to 4 reference fixes that we can create. Now with that we can then do certain things with it, so we could have a radial from it. In fact, let's just bring the range down a little bit so that we can see Rummel a little bit better. You can then, what you can do is you can do radials or range. So if you were asked to report that you, in fact we'll use Bevan, it's slightly further down the way, EVAN. You can just change it at will. Look, or you can just create a new one, it's up to you. What you can do then is you can turn around and say report level 5 miles before Bevan, for example. So what you want to do then is you want to go, I'll put a 5 miles before Bevan. Look at that. In fact, we need to be on the other mode, which means we might not be able to see it. But let's see. Arc. Has it done it? Bevan's off. Of course it is. Of course it is. Let's do Lina. And there we go. There's our 5 mile radius. You could also set radials off that. So, for example, if we wanted to do the 100 radial, we can just put 100 and pop that into the radial as well. And what you can do is generate a position there, which is really nice. So you've got the ability, it's very similar to say a Boeing in terms of how to use these facilities. So corresponding on the other side, we could do something like 300. Stick a line out the other side. Did I get 3 zeros in out of range? The 3,000 degrees. So you can play with this to your heart's content. Really nice, really good feature. So yeah, it's brilliant. Do like that, fully implemented. Obviously you can do it any number of times and then we can clear it if we don't want it anymore. Now, back to our flight plan. As I say, normally if we were to select a point such as Lina, so Lina's there, we would normally have the offset option there, but we don't. You can still put in your next waypoint here and you can put in a new destination, for example. But what we're going to do is, we've got pass there, we don't want pass, we want Simbrief. So what we're going to do is mess around with the direct 2s. So direct 2 comes up with a list of the waypoints as ever, but what we're going to do is we're going to create one that's off to one side. So Rummel, where's Rummel? Lina. We'll choose Lina, and what we're going to do is we can choose a number of things. You can see it's drawn a yellow dashed line here for direct 2. You can have the direct 2 and you can add in abeam points, and you'll see it's got a couple of green diamonds here, which are the abeam points for these 2 points here. So it's got the ability to do abeam points with a direct 2. Likewise, with the direct 2 you can also do a radial in. So we're going to do a radial in of 250 and see what that delivers for us. In fact, we're going to do a radial in of 270. Pop that in there. We've got this radial in. Now what we're going to do is we're going to play around with this a little bit. So let's come up here. We are going to take the heading into manual, and we're going to select a heading around here. We'll get the beep beep beep, which is anticipated. Expected, so we'll bring it round to here. Now in terms of the Airbus, you cannot engage the lateral navigation mode with the autopilot if you're more than 5 miles deviated left or right of track. So we shouldn't be able to set, we'll do it further down rather than just during this, but we'll do it further down. We'll just bring ourselves round so that we are going to deviate significantly from this track. And you might want to do this for weather or for whatever reasons. Actually what we'll do is we'll do it further along the route. So let's go back down here, squeeze across a bit. We'll do it from Balsey, A-L-S-I, change that. There we go, that's a bit more like it, gives us a bit of room to play with. We're still in the climb, so that's all good. Now basically what it's done is it's drawn an intercept line, and if I change the range on this, you can see it's an endless line, it's limitless, it's got no end to it because it's a radial. And what we're going to ask the aircraft to do is to intercept this line and then fly inbound to Balsey and then continue. So at the moment it's what, 30, 25, 24 miles away, but by the time we get here we should be at least 5 miles away. We can't regain this track if we're too far away. So if I set it now, it's come up with a dot to say it's armed in effect here, but because we're on a heading mode and we've got our direct 2 in, it's got this dashed line. It's not really active at the moment, is the best way to consider that, so we'll take it back. What we need to do is we need to go down to our element here, no nav intercept, but we're going to go direct to intercept and see what happens. There we go, there's our intercept. So it's worked out that on our current heading we would intercept this radial at that point, and then it's going to continue to Balsey, which I think is just so cool. I think that's brilliant. It is a feature of the real thing that they've managed to bring across. They've implemented it very well. I really do like how they've done that. And you can see now we've got 167 with our lateral navigation dot there. So what we're anticipating is that it will fly around there, which, you know, cool. I mean, how cool is that? How are we doing in terms of performance? 23,000 feet. Going to easily meet our performance criteria. I mean, I think it's just such a useful tool. So what I'll do is I'll just skip ahead to the point where we're actually intercepting, and we'll see what the aircraft behaviour is. I would add, by the way, that this probably wasn't the greatest terrain to start messing around with lateral deviations. Noticeably different cockpit sound as you move around. Very nice indeed. But yeah, so we started to get there. You can see it counting down 8.2 miles right of track, and we've got quite a steep, quite severe intercept angle here, so we will see how well it copes with that. I think there was something there, I'm not sure what it was, trying to sort its life out, I think. Yeah, we're coming in at quite a speed here, so I would anticipate it starting the turn short. Oh, there we go. It's doing it nicely. Doing it really nicely. I'll also mention, whilst it's doing this, let's pull this up and bring it across. This one. Our star. Our standard arrival is from up here, Sargo. What we're going to do is come down here at 15 miles. We start. We've got a little intersection point here, and we go into a left-hand turn, and then we're going onto a DME arc, 13-mile DME arc. Now, there's not many aircraft that I've come across that have flown these particularly well. It's also not a common thing in stars these days, the DME arc. I don't know why, but a lot of them with the RNAV tend to be a little bit more straightforward than this. But we're going to see if we can fly a DME arc at the other end, assuming the aircraft doesn't decide to kill itself between now and then. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to do. Let's get rid of that. This comes back to just using ourselves as a moving map. And now we're anticipating, levelling out, turning left. It's doing all of this very nicely, isn't it? I mean, these are famous last words. Very nice indeed. Oh. Whilst we've been talking, we haven't been concentrating. That needs to go to standard across the board. And here we go, past Balsy. Beautiful scenery, look at that. Switzerland, I do believe. I don't know the exact country borders around here. But very nice indeed. I'm really liking this windscreen wiper effect. I've never seen that. I've seen reflections in cockpits before, but never the windscreen wiper effect. Obviously, one of the things you can do is you can change settings for the level of reflection, not just on and off, but how impacted they are. That's very nice. How are we doing with our climb? It's quite a slow climb because we're quite heavy. We've got our top of climb here. Now, as I say, there's other elements to the MCDU that haven't been implemented, but there's not very many that I'm aware of. Landing lights, we left the landing lights on. It's always when you start talking about something, you start talking about using the facilities or the systems of the aircraft that it impacts upon your flying. Or at least that's my interpretation of it anyway, and I am sticking to it. So what I'll do is I'll continue the flight, and you can join me where we're levelling the cruise, and we'll have a look at jumping forwards on waypoints, which will be nice. It will shorten the flight for me, and it will obviously require less editing, more importantly. So I'll see you in a bit. Okay guys, as you just joined me, I'm getting towards the end of the cruise because I've skipped forwards, and one of the things I was considering is whether the random faults are based on time or flight leg miles you've flown, and it's obviously based on time because I managed to skip forward a considerable distance before we got anything come up. But this is literally it. This is just pinged. It's gone ping, master caution and pause. So let's see what it's come up with. It's come up with electrical battery 1 faults. What we're going to do is just go down here. You can see we've got some lights here. We've got the engine, which at the moment we don't need. We've got to unpause it, haven't we? Pause it, and we're going to go to see if we can figure out what's happening with our, where's it gone? Our battery problem. That's weird. Just going to top of descent. It came up with an electrical battery problem for battery 1. Yeah, it has got it, fault, got no battery. Let's do the standard, turn it off and on. Status, APU battery start not available, battery 1 is dead. There's not really a lot we can do for that in the air, but likewise, as a result you'll see that there's not really anything we can do as an ECAM option. Oh, have we got another one? Or is it the same one again? Clear. System, APU battery, no, it's still the same one. Let's just have a quick look at if it's got any effect on us. No. So what we're going to do is we need to commence our descent. So we've gone past our descent point whilst we've been looking at that. Let's wind it down, start the descent going. We're going all the way down to 3,000 initially. Here the engine's winding back. And this is one of those things where in terms of the ECAM there's not really much you can do. You know, that it is what it is. You've got an ECAM battery fault. Let's clear it and have a look at this. This is going to be our, there we go. Let's have a look at our electrical page. Here we go. Now the QRH would almost definitely have something in relation to this, but I'm not overly familiar with what is and isn't in the ECAM and what are your options. So with regards to this, we've lost one of our batteries, which is not great, because if you imagine that's one of our final vestiges of power that we might need for our flight. We're now into our descent, so we're over the sea, and so we're kind of committed to taking it on. That's one of the things I was going to look at actually. Let's just see. Clear that. Let's go to where are we looking? So data. We've got data pages here that we can use, by the way. So you've got the closest. Do I need to cancel it again, or have we got something? Oh no, I've got something else now. Nav GPWS terrain detector fault. GPWS terrain off. GPWS should be amber, so terrain, just turn that off. Straightforward enough. Whoa, what's going on now? That's just because I've recalled it. Electrical battery one fault we know about. Oh, it's all coming, isn't it? Yeah, that's fine. That's not new. Looking at our electrical page, you can see the battery's gone there, and then what was the other one? It was the terrain. So I doubt there's going to be an ECAM page for the terrain, but we need to be aware of that because just simply of the terrain is modelled on the ND. Obviously we're over the sea at the moment, so it's not going to show anything, and also the radar does work, which we haven't had on, but we'll just put that on just for the sake of system on, predictive wind shear can go on, and we leave everything else as it is. There's no precipitation out here to see, so it's not like we're missing anything. But we're in our descent, so not too far from home, descending down to 3,000 feet. We'll just have a look at the chart in terms of what we're doing. We're coming down here. As soon as we get to Sargo, it will, we've cut direct to Sargo, by the way. We're coming down here. The minimum altitude for Sargo is 4,000 feet, and then we come down to 3,000 feet for this portion of the arc here, and then we turn in towards our final approach course. And our final approach course, when we look at this, is going to be 188 on 111.5 Mike Alpha Oscar, which is our ILS. And you can see here in terms of our vertical profile, we're going to come down to 2,300 feet, join it at this point, then we can come down to 1,900 feet, and our final approach fix is here on the ILS, which is 4.8 miles on the Mike Alpha Oscar, and at that point we descend from 1,900 feet, 3-degree glide slope down here. And our missed approach, just looking at our missed approach, climb and runaway heading to 2,000 feet, then left turn direct to VOR, climbing 2,500 feet and hold. MSA is 2,500 feet, nothing else really is going to affect us in Simland, unless we start to get further failures. So yeah, that's all very good. All very good indeed. So I'll just get rid of that. I do like Navigraph. I have to point out though, it is a payware service, it's not free. Simbrief on the other hand is free and is an excellent piece of flight planning software that I highly recommend. It's very flexible. The only thing I've noticed is occasionally it doesn't have a profile for some of the more obscure aircraft. But let's just monitor our descent here as we come down. Might even be able to see at this range, yeah, this blob down here. We're going to keep the constraints on just so that we can monitor our descent. And we're coming down quite nicely. Just playing a little bit more with the buttons, by the way. You do have a RadNav page, which is pretty much standard. You can see it's already selected for our destination, so that's all very good. You've got a fuel prediction page, which is pretty standard fare these days. Nothing too remarkable about that. In terms of performance, I've already put in the next page details, next phase. Here we go. So these are our landing setups. The V approach is 135, so we'll come in. It's light winds, I believe, so we'll come in at 140. So our V app plus 5. Decision height 231. And there's a couple more here. So the MCDU menu doesn't really do anything. Takes you back to the FMGS. The ATC con isn't implemented. Secondary flight plan is implemented if you wanted to do it. We didn't do it, but you've got the opportunity to either initialize it or copy it across. And then finally we're going to have a look at the data page. Position monitor, IRS, GPS, all standard fare. Aircraft status, again standard fare, closest airports. Equitime point, that's a fun one. So you could have an equitime point between two positions, so LSGG to LEMH. For example, it would be able to tell you your equitime point. So it's actually behind us in terms of our equitime point if we were to use it. But obviously we're not going to now because we've gone past it. But basically that's quite straightforward. It's simply it's the position on the route where if you were to continue it takes the same amount of time to reach your destination as if you turn and go back to your origin, which is important if you're doing long distance transatlantic or even over the significant water where you're going to find it a challenge to get back to a safe zone such as over the water like we have here. Equitime point, so yeah, it is there. I've never used it, but we can go across. It's got the database of waypoints, navs, runways. These are not something you can alter. It does, however, have pilot waypoints, pilot navs, pilot runways if you wanted to input your own data, and you can do them here. So you could do, say for example, point bearing distance, GO, and you can put that out to the, let's put it out to the east, so 090 at 15 miles. Pop that in there. Wrong one. Place bearing distance, and it will just ask us to confirm it's going to be this one because it's at 15 miles away, not 3,900 miles away, and it's created that as a position now, as a point that we would be able to use if we wanted to as an actual thing. So we can give it an identifier and we can say it's going to be SARG, if you'll excuse the phone, 1, pop that there, and now we've got that. We can store it if we want, and we then can go on to create new waypoints. And if we wanted to do something, for example, we wanted to fly direct to something, we would be able to do that. We'd be able to mess around with it at our own volition. So it's very good, very flexible in terms of all of that, and all of them work. So we'll pop those on, pop that on, and that's all looking good. Still got our battery fault, still got our single fault with that, and yeah, we'll just go back to engine and monitor that as we go. So you can see we're coming down here, this little section here where it kind of kinks. That's our short section of arc, and we're coming down nicely for it. Just keeping fingers crossed we don't get any more emergencies, any more failures. You see, I've had it before where these have gone out and you have to mess around with this, which is always good fun. These do obviously function as you would expect, which is all very good. It's very unnerving when the screens go blank. You kind of like, oh, what? I've also had it with a discrepancy with the airspeeds between the systems, and it's like, oh, okay. So in some respects that's relatively straightforward because the airspeed on this is completely independent of the other air data sets, so hence why it's your emergency backup. But correspondingly you end up sitting there and going, well, you know, which one matches which. We've got 3, fortunately we can use 3, but yeah. So, and likewise knowledge of things like, let's get that back up, recall, the electrical battery, it's just because I've pressed the recall button, but the electrical battery system, for example, we've already had. But as I say, I've had a few in relation to the wheels, flight controls. Not so much flight controls. I've had hydraulic problems, wheel problems, conditioning problems. I haven't had a bleed problem yet. So, you know, as I say, it's quite wide and varied. And actually, it's going to be drawn from the list you saw, where you could pre-select or preset what you wanted. It says Okay, as you can see, as you rejoin me, we're just turning onto our short section of our DME arc, and we're just going to see how it flies it. Now in real life, if you're on your own, solo or whatever, you tend not to fly it as a gentle arc. What you tend to do is straight line it off a bit. So you'll fly short straight, and then you'll turn right a little bit, then you'll fly short straight, then you'll turn right a little bit, etc. So what we're going to do is just see what it does. It's not going to do it for very long, but we do need to see what it does. Let's just pull up that. We'll just watch what it does now. You can see it's got an ever such gradual bank to it as it's going around this arc, which is what we would have anticipated. Just gradually changing its heading. Very nicely done. It's very light winds today though, it's only 12 knots, so you're not going to see a massive sort of impact from the wind. So you can see we're getting towards Donav, which is where we start our next bit of the descent. And then we're going to finally descend down to 1,900 feet, which is for our platform altitude for our final approach fix. Okay. So what we'll do is we'll take control of the speed now and just bring it back a little bit more. It's controlled the speed constraints quite nicely. I like that. What we'll do is we'll just expedite it down to 1900 feet. And the airfield is somewhere just over here. In fact, I think with my X-ray eyes, there it is, look. My super duper vision.
2,500.
We do need our 1017 actually set, don't we? Set all round. So call up, get rid of that, call up that, and we want our performance page, not progress, performance page, and 135 for the approach speed, 130 for landing speeds. Happy days.
2,000.
Call up the landing system. Pop that up, bring that up, and get rid of that now. What we'll do, I like doing this by the way, one of the things you can do is center your instrument so that it's the normal view you would see, and then if you bring this down here you can put it over, and it's descending. Not yet. We will take the approach, lost it at this point, center that, we'll take the auto throttle and the autopilot out, and we will manually fly it. Diamond's coming in. Not flying it very well though, are you, Richard? And we'll assess its manual handling qualities just by doing a hand-flown descent, hand-flown landing. Got idle, need a little bit more drag really. Final stage of flap coming, that'll help us. It's a very nose down attitude there, with quite high, drifting slightly left of track. Flying the flight director. As the nose comes back up, we'll watch the speed drop.
1,000.
One of the things to bear in mind is that we've got low slung engines, so as we power up the engines we would normally anticipate a pitch up. Flying the flight director to just see how accurately how I can fly, and B, how accurate the flight director is in delivering us to 200 feet or 231 feet above our touchdown elevation. It's very sensitive.
500. 400.
100 above.
300.
Minimum.
Landing.
Glide
200.
slope. Glide slope.
We're drifting.
100. 50. 40. 30. 20.
Retard.
10.
5.
It's a bit scruffy, but we're down. There we go. We're down. Okay, let's just bring her to a halt. Can't be bothered taxiing off, and we'll have a quick chat about what we've encountered. So, let's just pop some brakes on and we can have a quick chat. So the first and foremost thing is we'll just pop outside. The exterior model for me, it's nothing special. I'll be honest, it's not the aircraft's strong point. However, what I will say is it's more than countered by what is the aircraft's, or what are the aircraft's strong points, and there's quite a few of them. The animations, they're quite alright. Controls, nice. Have a quick look in here, so let's just have a look at this. In terms of detailing, there's quite a bit of detail in there, isn't there? As I say, the 3D modelling is generally very nice with this aircraft. Again, smooth, nice behaviour, nice response. The texturing's not always that great, as you can see just inside here. There's no textures at all, but so overall on the outside, 3D modelling and texturing for me is good. There are better out there, but I think for what it's aiming to do, this is perfectly good. Inside, we've discussed the aesthetics and 3D modelling of the panel, which are good. They're very good. A couple of omissions, obviously, in terms of, for example, the fact that the switches don't move by default, the push button switches, but everything else does. Pretty much everything that you'd need is in some way or form simulated or replicated, which is very good. So it's got a high level of authenticity in terms of the available switchgear. Hasn't got the, shall we say, the bling, but in my opinion it doesn't need the bling. So nicely 3D modelled, nicely textured, nicely implemented, very good lighting as well. I will highlight that. But then what we're going to do is we're going to come to the pièce de résistance, really, which is the flight setup that you can get through this. The aircraft itself has a really good setup for the flight management system. There's a couple of things such as offsets that aren't included, but pretty much everything that I encountered or I have tried to use has been there, including the ability to create and save your own information for waypoints, etc., nav aids, active flight plan, secondary. All of this stuff you can mess around with, which is really, really good. I'll be honest, I haven't messed around with it much, but you know, you can put in data to your heart's content in terms of new runways, for example. So yeah, all very, very good, and it does retain that information. So if I go back to waypoints here, you can see we've got Sargo. You can create a new waypoint, or you can delete all, and it's persistent, which is really, really nice. So the the MCDU and the flight management guidance system is very good. The actual way the aircraft handles, or the system handles the aircraft in terms of automatics, very, very good. Very impressed. It's not that long ago that VNAV was a bit of a challenge in X-Plane 11, but this is comfortably manages it to the best of my experience. I haven't had any hiccups with it. In terms of the Toliss interactive simulation control system, now this really is quite a good piece of work. The attention to detail in loading is very, very good. The real life The real-time graph over here is very good for helping you with loading, so you can really set it up in all sorts of different setups and situations. Likewise, obviously you can save and load situations, which is good. Ground services are a little bit of a disappointment not having visual ground services on the outside of the aircraft, but obviously, as this would infer, this animated services, that's for the future. The pushback, I've found, needs a bit of guesswork to estimate just how far back 70 meters is, for example. The aircraft obviously does work with better pushback, but my better pushback has seen better days at the moment. It needs reinstalling. Aircraft doors, yeah, but this is a great tool, and actually you can see now what it's done is it's randomly populated these. So we've had a comms failure with the radio management panel. So if we look at the radio management panel, you can see that over here RMP2 has failed. We've also had a cross-bleed failure. So these are now cross-bleed failure, which is something that I hadn't spotted. Let's pull up the fuel page. No, don't do that. Let's pull up the fuel page. As I say, I'm not massively experienced in the Airbus, but I mean, a cross-feed failure in the current state of play with everything working isn't really going to be a massive issue. Sorry, cross-bleed fault, not cross-feed, cross-bleed fault. So let's have a look at the air. Yeah, you see we've got auto throttle off just because of our behaviour, but bleeds, auto-bleed. No, it's not come up with anything there. Battery 1 we knew about, and GPWS terrain fail we knew about. So basically what it does is it takes the random fault just basically takes and injects these faults here, which is very good, and for me that's a real highlight of the system. I think it's superb. A, it's good fun, and B, if you are doing your type rating or you're just line check, then potentially this sort of thing is useful to you. So yeah, great. If you enjoyed the video, as I say, please don't forget to tick like, share and subscribe, the notification bell as well. So that's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please don't forget to tick like, share and subscribe. The subscribe particularly means a lot to me. It helps me with the metrics of how the channel's performing. And likewise, if you want to be informed of future videos, please don't forget to tick the bell. And I hope you enjoyed the video. I will see you in the next one. Take care.